Greetings and salutations. This is the Adjutant. I want you to imagine something with me. The retirement ceremony is over. The speeches have been given. The flag has been folded. The photos have been taken. The family is smiling. Your commander shakes your hand one last time and says, "Congratulations." You walk to your car. For the first time in decades, you drive away from the installation knowing you have nowhere to go, nothing to report to, nobody to report to tomorrow morning. It should feel incredible. And for a while, it does. Then Monday arrives. Nobody calls. Nobody needs your decisions. Nobody sends you an email marked urgent. Nobody is waiting for you at 06:30 in the morning. The uniform hangs quietly in the closet, and somewhere during those first few weeks, a question begins to surface that almost nobody talks about. Now what? I've spoken with retirees who told me they were completely prepared for retirement until they actually retired. One gentleman actually said something I'll never forget. He looked at me and said, "Thomas, the military gave me retirement briefings. What I really needed was a checklist." That sentence has stayed with me for years because he's right. The military does a great job preparing you to leave. It doesn't always prepare you for what comes after you've left. That's why I've made this video. Not because I want you to have another briefing. I want you to avoid the mistakes I've watched good people make after 20 or 30 years of honorable service. And here's what's interesting. Most of those mistakes had nothing to do with intelligence. They weren't lazy. They weren't irresponsible. They simply didn't know what they didn't know. So today I'm going to walk you through the military retirement checklist I wish every service member received a year before retirement, not a week before. We're going to talk about money. We're going to talk about healthcare. We're going to talk about benefits. We're going to talk about family, purpose, and one item that almost nobody discusses that may determine whether retirement becomes one of the happiest seasons of your life or one of the most confusing. If you're 5 years away from retirement, this video is for you. If you're 6 months away from retirement, it's definitely for you. And if you've already retired, I think you'll recognize you're somewhere in today's conversation. If you're new here, welcome. Every week we talk about military retirement, military benefits, VA disability, wealth building, leadership, and living a life of purpose after military service. My goal isn't simply to give you information. It is to help you better make decisions because good decisions compound, just like good investments. Now, let's begin with the first item on the checklist, and it isn't money. It isn't healthcare. It isn't paperwork. It's something far more important, your identity. I know that may sound strange. After all, when most people think about retirement, they immediately think about pensions, TRICARE, VA disability, taxes. Now, those things matter. We're going to discuss every one of them. But over the years, I've become convinced that the first challenge of retirement isn't financial. It's personal. For decades, the military has answered a question for you every single morning. Who am I today? You're a platoon sergeant, a first sergeant, a company commander, a warrant officer, a staff officer, a senior NCO, a leader. You have a mission. People depend on you. Your phone rings because someone needs your judgment. Then one day, the role ends. Now, notice I didn't say your value ends. I said your role ends. Those are two very different things. One of the biggest mistakes I see retirees make is confusing their position with their identity. The uniform was something you wore. It was never who you were. The rank was something you earned. It was never your identity. If your identity is tied exclusively to the military, retirement can feel like losing a part of yourself. If your identity is rooted in your character, your values, your faith, your family, and your purpose, retirement becomes an opportunity instead of a crisis. I remember something I experienced after leaving active service. For years, nearly every hour of my day had already been planned. Meetings, trainings, evaluations, deadlines, problems to solve, people to mentor. Then suddenly, the calendar looked very different. No one was assigning me my next mission. At first, the freedom felt unusual. Then I realized something. The military had trained me to complete missions. Now I had to learn how to choose them. That's a completely different skill. And I think that's one of the greatest transitions every retiree faces. No one tells you what your next purpose is. You have to decide. So before you retire, ask yourself a question that may be more important than any financial calculation. When the uniform comes off, what do you want to become? Don't answer that casually. Spend time with it. Write it down. Talk about it with your spouse. Pray about it. Think deeply. Because retirement isn't simply about leaving something, it's about moving towards something. Now, let's move to the second section of our checklist. This is where most retirement briefings begin. Money. But I want to approach it differently because I don't believe retirement is won or lost by how much money you have. I believe it's won or lost by how well you understand your money. I've met retirees receiving military retired pay, VA disability compensation, and an excellent civilian salary who still felt financially stressed. I've also met retirees with far less income who lived with tremendous peace. The difference wasn't income, the difference was clarity. The first financial question on your checklist isn't, how much will I receive? It's, do I understand exactly how my retirement income works? Know your retirement pay, know your deductions, know your tax situations, know how your VA disability compensation fits into the picture, know when payments begin, know what changes over time. Uncertainty creates anxiety, preparation creates confidence. One of the advantages I have had throughout my career is seeing thousands of veterans at different stages of life, and one lesson keeps repeating itself over and over, and that is financial confidence rarely comes from making one brilliant decision. It usually comes from avoiding a series of preventable mistakes. That's what this checklist is really about. It's not perfection, preparation. Now, let's talk about something that deserves far more attention than it usually receives. The survivor benefit plan. I've seen people spend more time choosing a television than they understand trying to decisions that could affect their family for decades. Don't rush it. Read it carefully. Ask questions. Discuss it together. You're not checking a box. You're making a legacy decision. The same is true for your beneficiaries. Life changes. Families change. Marriages begin. Marriages end. Children become adults, grandchildren arrive. Review every beneficiary designation. Don't assume paperwork you completed 15 years ago still reflects your life today. Then ask yourself another question. If I retire tomorrow, would my family know where everything is? Not just your money, everything. Insurance, bank accounts, retirement information, passwords, important documents, because one of the greatest gifts you can leave your family isn't simply financial security, it's organization. The less confusion they face, the more peace they'll have. And that's something every one of us can provide. Finally, before we leave this section, let's talk briefly about debt. Retirement should increase your freedom. Debt often limits it. Every dollar you don't owe is another dollar available for your future, your family, your travel, your giving, or your next dream. That doesn't mean everyone enters retirement debt-free. Life is more complicated than that. But it does mean every decision should move toward greater freedom rather than greater obligation. Because retirement isn't simply about having enough money to stop working, it's about having enough freedom to choose how you'll spend the years you work so hard to earn. Now, if finances are one area where people make expensive mistakes after retirement, there's another where those mistakes can affect something even more valuable than money, and that is health. And that's where the next section of our checklist begins, okay? Now let's talk about your healthcare checklist. I don't think people intentionally neglect this part of retirement. I think they understand it. When you spent an entire career in uniform, healthcare becomes something that's just simply there. Appointments get scheduled, prescriptions get filled, you know where to go, you know who to call. Retirement changes that. And if you're not prepared, what should be a smooth transition can quickly become frustrating. The first item on your healthcare checklist is simple. Verify everything. Don't assume your information is correct because it's always been correct. Verify your DEERS information. Verify your dependents. Verify your address. Verify your contact information. Small mistakes have a way of becoming very inconvenient at exactly the wrong time. Next, understand your TRICARE options before you need them. Notice I didn't say after you retire. I said before. One thing I've learned over the years is that important decisions should never be made under pressure if you can avoid it. Know your enrollment periods. Know your premiums. Know your deductibles. Know which providers participate. Know what changes as you grow older and eventually become eligible for Medicare. Confidence comes from understanding, not guessing. If you're planning to receive health care through the Department of Veterans Affairs, don't wait until you become sick to learn how the system works. Enroll early. Know where your nearest VA medical center is. Learn how appointments are scheduled. Understand what services are available. As someone who has spent more than 2 decades working within the Department of Veterans Affairs, I've watched one truth repeat itself over and over again. Preparation reduces frustration. The veterans who tend to navigate the systems most successfully are usually the ones who prepared before they needed it. The same principle applies to prescriptions. Now, you want to make sure there isn't a gap in your prescriptions during your transition. Have copies of important medical records. Know who your civilian providers will be if necessary. Again, none of these things are complicated. They're simply easier to do before they become urgent. Now let's move into something that surprises many retirees, your benefits checklist. This may be one of the most valuable sections in today's video because there are benefits you've already earned. The challenge isn't earning them. The challenge is knowing they exist. One of the first things I encourage every retiree to do is create what I call a benefits inventory. Sit down with a notebook, write one question across the top. What benefits have I earned that I am not using? Just write it on the top. The question alone can change your retirement. Think about everything available to you. Your commissary privileges, your exchange privileges, morale, welfare, and recreation programs, space available travel, state veteran benefits, educational opportunities, property tax exemptions or reductions, vehicle registration benefits, business assistance, dependent education programs. Every state is different. That's why I encourage people to spend an afternoon researching their own state instead of assuming someone else will tell them what's available. Too many veterans leave benefits on the table simply because nobody pointed them in the right direction. Don't let that be you. Now, let's talk about VA disability. If you're preparing to file a claim, preparation matters. Gather your records. Review your service treatment records. Understand the conditions you're claiming. Make sure your documentation tells the story accurately. Again, after more than 20 years in VA adjudication, I've learned something that applies far beyond disability claims. The best decisions are usually made before deadline arrives. Don't wait until retirement week to begin organizing information that you should have had collected years ago. Now, let's transition to employment. Even if you're convinced you'll never work another day after retirement, I still encourage you to prepare as though an opportunity may someday present itself, because retirement gives you options, and options are valuable. Translate your military experience into civilian language. Remember, civilian employers may not understand military terminology. They may not know what an executive officer does. They may not understand the responsibilities of a command sergeant major. Your responsibility is helping them understand the leadership, decision-making, budgeting, operations, logistics, personnel management, and problem-solving you spent decades developing. Don't make them translate your experience. Do that work for them. Update your resume. Build a strong LinkedIn profile. reconnect with former colleagues, attend networking events. Remember something important. Networking isn't asking strangers for jobs. Networking is maintaining relationships long before you need help. Many opportunities arrive because someone remembers your character, not simply your resume. Now, another valuable asset many retirees overlook is their security clearance. Understand how long it remains active. Understand its value within your industry. For many veterans, the clearance represents years of credibility that civilian employers highly respect. Don't underestimate that. Now, let's move into your legal checklist. I know this isn't the exciting part, but sometimes the most important decisions aren't the most exciting. Review your will. Review your trust if you have one. Review your healthcare directives. Review your powers of attorneys. Review every beneficiary designation. Remember, beneficiary forms often determine where assets go, regardless of what your will says. That surprises many people. Take the time to make sure everything works together. And while you're doing that, organize your life. One folder, one secure location, military records, insurance policies, bank accounts, investment information, retirement documents, VA paperwork, title, deeds, emergency contacts, important passwords. Ask yourself one question. If something happened to me tomorrow, could the people I love find everything they need without searching the entire house? If the answer is no, today is the day to fix it. Because organization is one of the greatest acts of love we can leave behind. So far, we've talked about your identity. We've strengthened your financial foundation. We've prepared your health care. We've protected your benefits. We've discussed employment. We've organized your legal affairs. Those things are incredibly important. But now we're going to discuss something that may have a greater impact on your happiness than all of them combined. Your relationships. Because retirement doesn't change your life, it changes the lives of the people who retire with you. Now, let's talk about the people who are going to experience your retirement right along with you. Your family. One of the greatest misconceptions about retirement is that it's an individual event. Well, you know what? It isn't. When you retire, your spouse retires from one way of life too. Your children experience a different version of home. Your routine changes. Your expectation changes. Your relationships change. For years, the military often dictated your schedule. Deployments, schools, temporary duty, long hours, weekend duty, field exercises. Your family learned to build life around those realities. Then suddenly, you're home every day. That sounds wonderful, and often it is, but it also requires adjustment. One conversation I encourage every couple to have before retirement is this. What do you picture our life looking like 1 year from now? It's such a simple question, but it uncovers expectations that might otherwise remain hidden. One spouse may be dreaming about traveling the country. The other may be dreaming about finally slowing down. One may expect more time together. The other may expect more independence. Neither expectation is wrong, but unspoken expectations often become unnecessary disappointments. Talk about finances. Talk about travel. Talk about where you'll live. Talk about grandchildren. Talk about aging parents. Talk about daily routines. Talk about personal space. Talk about dreams that have been postponed for years because military service came first. Those conversations don't weaken a marriage, they strengthen one. Now, let's move to what I believe is the most overlooked part of the retirement plan. Your purpose. Remember the retiree I mentioned at the beginning of this video? Months after our conversation, I asked him another question. I said, if you could go back 1 year before retirement, what would you do differently? I expected him to mention money or taxes or benefits. He didn't. He looked at me for a moment and then he said something that has stayed with me ever since. I would have spent less time planning how to leave the military and more time planning what I was going to run toward. I don't know that I've ever heard retirement explained more beautifully than that. Too many people spend years planning their exit. Very few spend their same amount of time designing their next chapter. The military gave you a mission. Retirement gives you a choice. And there is a difference. You now have the privilege of deciding where your experience will make its next impact. Maybe you'll mentor young soldiers. Maybe you'll coach. Maybe you'll teach. Maybe you'll start a business. Maybe you'll volunteer. Maybe you'll become the grandparent you've always wanted to be. Maybe you'll finally write the book you've been talking about for years. Maybe you'll simply become more present for the people who love you. Whatever your next mission is, choose it intentionally, because purpose rarely arrives by accident. Now, let's talk about your health. For decades, someone else measured your readiness, fitness tests, medical appointments, and your requirements. After retirement, no one is coming. You become responsible for protecting the body that carried you through an entire career of service. Walk every day, strength train, stretch, protect your sleep, eat in a way that supports the life you want to live 20 years from now, not just tomorrow morning. Retirement isn't about adding years to your life, it's about adding life to your years. And don't neglect your emotional health. One of the greatest challenges many veterans quietly experience isn't financial, it's isolation. For years, you belonged to a tribe. People understood your humor, your experience, your language, your values. Then retirement arrives. If you're not intentional, that sense of community can slowly disappear. You want to stay connected, call your friends, meet for coffee, join organizations that genuinely interest you, volunteer, serve, mentor, teach. Human beings were never designed to live life alone, and neither were veterans. Now we've reached the final item on the checklist. It's the item that quietly sits underneath every other one we've discussed. How do you define success? For most of your military career, success was relatively easy to measure. The next promotion, the next assignment, the next school, the next command, the next evaluation. Retirement changes the scoreboard. Now success looks different. It's measured by peace instead of promotion, by relationships instead of rank, by influence instead of authority, by significance instead of title. That's why I want to leave you with one final thought. One day, no one will remember exactly what rank you retired at. Most people won't remember your duty position. Many won't remember how many medals you wore. But the people whose lives you touched, they'll remember your character. They'll remember your kindness. They'll remember your wisdom. They'll remember whether you were present. They'll remember whether you invested in them. And I believe that's the real legacy of a military career. Not simply that you served your country, but that your years of service prepared you to continue serving others long after the uniform came off. Now, when I look back over my own journey, I realized that retirement from the Army wasn't the end of my service. It was the beginning of a different kind of service. I've had the privilege of practicing law, serving veterans through the Department of Veterans Affairs for more than 2 decades, teaching as an adjunct college professor, and now through this channel, helping service members and veterans prepare for some of the biggest decisions of their lives. None of those opportunities required a uniform. They required purpose. And that's my hope for you, that you don't simply retire, that you transition, that you don't simply stop serving, that you discover new ways to serve. So before you retire, complete your checklist, know your finances, protect your health care, understand every benefit you've earned, prepare your legal affairs, strengthen your family, protect your health, build your community, and most importantly, choose your next mission before retirement arrives. Because retirement is not the finish line, it's the starting line for one of the most meaningful chapters of your life. If this video has helped you, I'd appreciate if you give it a thumbs up and share it with another service member who's preparing for retirement. One conversation, one checklist, or one decision could change the course of someone's next 30 years. If you haven't already subscribed, I'd be honored to have you join us. Every week we have conversations about military retirement, military benefits, VA disability, wealth building, leadership, and living a life of purpose after service. Thank you for spending part of your day with me. And so there you have it. I wish you all blessings and blessings. Shalom.